There are castles for kings, and there are castles for madmen. Today we won't be talking about golden thrones. We'll be talking about buildings that hang over abysses, sink deep into the earth, and rot alive. You'll see a fortress that looks like a set from Mad Max and a castle whose kitchen collapsed into the sea, along with the cooks. And finally, a place called the Inverted Tower. Just looking at the photos will make your head spin. Just the facts, just crazy architecture. Let's get going. And our list opens with a place that at first glance appears to be an ancient fortress that has survived hundreds of sieges. Spain, the city of Benalmádena. Before you is the castle of Calamaros. When you see these towers, carved arches, and mighty walls, it seems as if the knights of the Round Table, or at least Spanish grandees of the 15th century, lived here. But the reality is much stranger. This stone giant was built not in the Middle Ages, but at the end of the 20th century. And the most explosive thing here is who built it and how. This is not the work of a renowned architectural firm or a government commission. This entire enormous complex was erected by a single man, Dr. Esteban Martin. He was a successful American surgeon, but at some point he was overcome by an obsession. He quit his practice, returned to Spain, and decided to build a monument to Christopher Columbus. It sounds noble, but the execution was maddeningly limited. Dr. Martin had no architectural training, no drawings, no detailed plans. He had only a dream and 2 mason assistants. Imagine 3 men, without heavy equipment, cranes, or engineers, laying brick after brick for 7 years, improvising as they went. It's pure freestyle in stone. That's why the castle looks like a lacework Frankenstein. The doctor wanted to combine in one building all the styles that existed in Spain during the time of Columbus. It's a mixture of everything: Gothic with its sharp spires, Romanesque, Byzantine motifs, and Moorish patterns. Typically, architects try to adhere to a single style to create a harmonious building. But here, styles collide, clash, and intertwine. The incredible number of small details, stucco moldings, carvings, and figurines make the facade appear soft, as if it were not stone but dripping wax or a giant castle of wet sand. But that's not all. Dr. Martin was so obsessed with the idea of immortalizing Columbus that he encoded the entire story of the discovery of America in stone. If you look closely, the castle itself resembles a ship, its bow pointing west, toward the New World. Hidden within the stone are the images of 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Niña. This isn't just a building, it's a gigantic stone book, which the author wrote for 7 years, his hands bleeding. Within this chaos lies another surprise, one that has made it into the Guinness Book of World Records. The doctor managed to incorporate the smallest church in the world into the complex. Its area is only 1.96 square meters. The priest barely fits in there, and the parishioners are forced to stand outside. Sadly, Dr. Martin passed away before his creation was recognized as a masterpiece. For a long time, local authorities and architects turned up their noses at the castle, calling it kitsch and tasteless. But now it attracts thousands of people eager to see what a man obsessed with a single idea is capable of. This is no longer just a castle. It is a monument to incredible human perseverance, frozen in stone. If you thought the previous castle was strange, then brace yourself, because we are heading to rainy Scotland. Here, among misty hills and ancient forests, stands something that makes you rub your eyes and check if someone slipped something in your morning coffee. Kelburn Castle is a true 10th century fortress that belonged to the same aristocratic family for 800 years. But today, it is called nothing less than an acid mansion, and it deserves that title 100%. Imagine a classic medieval castle with stern towers, massive walls, and a rich history. Now imagine someone took a giant can of spray paint and turned this architectural landmark into the backdrop for the wildest rave in human history. In 2007, the current owner, the 10th Earl of Glasgow, faced a serious problem. The castle's exterior concrete cladding, added in the 1950s, had begun to crumble. Restoration was prohibitively expensive, and the sight of the peeling walls was depressing. Instead of spending years raising funds and adhering to tedious historic preservation regulations, the Earl decided to take a path of sheer madness. He invited 4 world-renowned artists from Brazil, gave them free rein, and thousands of cans of brightly colored paint. The result is mind-blowing. The facade of the ancient fortress is now completely covered in psychedelic graffiti. Here, giant cartoon characters, enormous yellow creatures, strange geometric patterns, and bright flashes of every color of the rainbow are intertwined. It's a true visual conflict that provokes cognitive dissonance in the viewer. On one hand, ancient stones that have seen knights and kings; on the other, modern street art at its most garish. As you approach the castle, it seems as if some kind of systemic failure has occurred in reality. You expect seriousness and pathos, but instead, you get a dose of pure, concentrated chaos. Local monument preservation organizations were, to put it mildly, furious. They demanded that this disgrace be immediately washed away and the castle restored to its historical appearance. But the Earl of Glasgow proved to be quite the rebel. He realized that this bold move had transformed his castle from a boring museum into one of the most visited attractions in the country. Ultimately, the temporary event lasted for a decade. Kelbourne's madness is not only in its appearance but in its very concept, so brazenly and shamelessly hijacking centuries-old traditions for the sake of hype and economy. It's an architectural challenge to an entire conservative society. Inside, the castle remains a luxurious estate with antique furniture and portraits of ancestors, but from the outside, it screams that the old world has long since lost out to modern glamour. The contrast between the austere gray towers and the neon eyes that stare at you from the walls creates the atmosphere of a strange dream. This is a place where history collided with modern madness and decided they could share a common path. Many consider this vandalism of the highest order, others a brilliant marketing ploy. But one thing is certain, this spectacle is unforgettable. Kelbourne is a castle that doesn't just stand on earth, it literally wobbles in space, reminding us that even the most serious things can have a very strange sense of humor. This is a perfect example of how boring destruction can be transformed into a vibrant triumph of human imagination, albeit bordering on a complete lack of taste in the classical sense. Scottish classicism in a Brazilian carnival wrapper. That's what this acid mansion is. It looks so absurd that at some point it even begins to seem beautiful. But are you ready to accept such art, or is it too much? It's up to you to decide, and we'll move on to a building that holds far darker secrets within its walls. If the previous entries on our list evoked more confusion or a smile, then our third entry will make your palms sweat. We're transported to the wilds of the American state of Wyoming. Imagine a completely empty valley surrounded by rugged mountains, where an eerie silhouette rises against the sunset, resembling the skeleton of a giant wooden monster. This is the Smith Mansion, popularly known as the tower that takes lives. This structure is pure, concentrated chaos, embodied in logs and planks. Its creator, Francis Lee Smith, was no mad scientist. He was an ordinary engineer who one day decided to build a house for his family. But something went wrong. What began as a cozy family nest turned into an obsession that lasted 12 long years and ultimately destroyed everything this man held dear. The madness of this place lies in the fact that Smith built it alone, without any drawings, plans, or even the use of ordinary nails in some parts of the structure. He simply added floor after floor, balcony after balcony, following only some inner voice. Looking at this building, it seems to defy all the laws of physics. Stairs here can lead to nowhere, rooms hang over a chasm, at strange angles. And the entire structure looks as if it is about to collapse at the first gust of wind. Francis spent every free moment here. His wife, unable to bear life in a perpetual construction site amidst chaotic piles of wood, finally took the children and left, leaving her husband alone with his wooden monster. But Smith didn't stop. He continued to climb higher and higher, building new levels of his madness. He slept on bare boards, ate among sawdust, and spent all his earnings on new building materials. It was a veritable hermit's castle, growing more dangerous with every meter. Tragedy struck while Francis was working on another section at the very top of his tower. During a strong wind at such a great height, an accident occurred, and his life's journey ended right there, in the midst of his life. Since then, the castle has stood abandoned. No one lives there, and no one dares to complete or demolish it. Locals try to avoid the place. They say that when the wind blows between the loosely fitted logs, the building emits sounds like groans or heavy breathing. An atmosphere of utter loneliness and lost sanity reigns within. The tools Francie assembled on that fateful day are scattered everywhere. It's as if he simply stepped out for a moment and is about to return to add another rickety balcony to his endless tower. This house is more than just an architectural curiosity. It's a vivid illustration of how far a person can go when their dream turns into a destructive passion. The Smith Mansion looks like the lair of a madman from a horror movie, and the most frightening thing about it is that it is absolutely real. There is no professional polish or design thought here, only naked enthusiasm bordering on madness. The building is slowly crumbling under the harsh Wyoming climate, but it still stands, towering over the valley like a monument to a man who wanted to reach for the sky but was betrayed by his own structure. Looking at this wooden skeleton is truly eerie, for behind every plank you can sense the invisible presence of someone who poured their soul into these walls and ultimately remained within them forever. This is a place where architecture ceases to be art and becomes a dangerous diagnosis. Are you ready to climb to its 5th or 6th level? Personally, I wouldn't recommend it. Let's go where the stones stand firmer, though they hold no less strange secrets. From the ghostly wooden tower, we are transported to the rugged coast of Northern Ireland, where ruins stand frozen on the edge of basalt cliffs, which could serve as the backdrop for the darkest fantasy. Dunluce Castle looks as if it is trying to balance on the brink of two worlds, Earth and the abyss. But there is a moment in its history when this balance was disrupted in the most terrifying and absurd way. This place is called the Castle with a Kitchen in the Abyss, and this is not just a beautiful metaphor. Imagine a mighty fortress erected on a narrow rocky promontory, connected to the mainland only by a tiny bridge. The architects of the time, blinded by the desire to build the most impregnable and impressive citadel, made a fatal mistake. They assumed that the basalt rock would forever bear the weight of enormous stone walls. In pursuit of panoramic views and proximity to the sea, they pushed the buildings so close to the cliff that there was virtually no distance between comfort and the abyss. Dunluce's madness reached its peak in 1639. It was a cold and stormy night. The castle's owner, the Earl of Antrim, was hosting guests with his wife, Lady Catherine Manners. Fireplaces blazed in the main halls, wine flowed, and work was in full swing in the vast castle kitchen. Dozens of cooks and servants prepared an exquisite dinner, clattering with dishes, unaware that the very ground beneath their feet had already sealed their fate. At the height of the evening, when the roar of the waves below grew particularly violent, a roar echoed through the air, drowning out even the sounds of the storm. A huge section of the cliff, along with the kitchen's foundation, simply gave way and collapsed. In an instant, the room filled with people, stoves, heavy copper utensils, and prepared dishes ceased to exist. Everything plummeted from a great height straight into the boiling sea foam. The kitchen literally vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a gaping hole in the wall leading into the void. Legend has it that only one person survived the catastrophe, a small cook who, at the moment of the collapse, was sitting in the farthest corner of the kitchen, the only patch of floor miraculously remaining standing. All the other inhabitants of that room vanished forever into the abyss. Lady Catherine was so shaken by this event that she flatly refused to remain in the castle. She declared that she would never again sleep in a place where the sea could snatch you from your bed at any moment. From that day on, Dunluce's decline began. The family moved out, and the once majestic castle became a silent witness to human arrogance. Today, strolling through these ruins, you can still see that very edge. The sight evokes a truly primal fear. You stand in the place where a room once stood, and before you see only an endless horizon and a 30-meter free fall down to jagged rocks. This architectural decision seems utterly devoid of common sense. Why build so close to the edge, knowing the power of the ocean and the fragility of stone. Dunluce is a monument to how ambition and the desire to impress can lead to disaster. The owners wanted to dominate the elements, but the elements simply took part of their home. The place is permeated with an atmosphere of anxiety. The wind blowing through the empty eye sockets seems to still carry the sounds of that fateful night. This is a warning castle. Nature has no mercy for those who ignore its laws for the sake of a beautiful view from their window. Today, it's one of the most photographed landmarks in Ireland, but few dare to approach the very edge, knowing that the basalt continues to crumble into the sea, meter by meter, taking the history of this insane construction into the abyss. We will leave this precipice behind and head to a castle that doesn't fall from the cliff but literally merges with it, turning the lives of its inhabitants into a protracted nightmare. From Northern Ireland, we travel to Slovenia to see a castle that seems the embodiment of paranoid architectural despair. While the previous heroes of our list built on the edge of cliffs, the creators of Predjama Castle went even further. They literally shoved the building inside a gigantic rock. This structure doesn't stand next to the mountain. It grows into it, like a huge concrete parasite blocking the entrance to the dark maw of a cave. Just look at this spectacle. At a height of 123 meters, a void gapes in the sheer wall, and it is precisely into this void that 4 stories of stone fortifications are inscribed. From a defense standpoint, this is genius. The castle is impossible to bypass, impossible to fire upon from above, and the only path leading to it is completely exposed to fire. But from the standpoint of common sense and comfort, this is absolute madness. Living in such a place was a true test of one's psyche and health. Imagine your bedroom. A damp stone alcove where icy water drips from the ceiling 24/7. The rear walls of the castle are simply undressed rock. The rooms were perpetually dark, cold, and so damp that expensive clothing and tapestries would rot within months. The people here lived in conditions more suited to bats than aristocrats. But the fear of enemies was so great that the owners were willing to turn their lives into a slow, languishing existence in a stone refrigerator, just to feel safe. The most legendary and insane chapter in the history of this place is associated with the knight Erasmus Luger, the local Robin Hood. In the 10th century, he managed to quarrel with the emperor and locked himself away in his impenetrable sea. The army besieged the castle for 1 year and 1 day. The soldiers below were sure the defenders were about to eat their own boots from hunger. But Erasmus mocked them, throwing freshly roasted game and baskets of ripe cherries to the besiegers. The enemies thought it was black magic, but the secret lay in the castle's parasitic design. Behind the living quarters lay a network of intricate cave passages that stretched for many kilometers and emerged on the other side of the mountain. While the emperor's army froze at the foot of the cliff, the people in Rosma quietly went to the neighboring village for provisions. It was an ideal survival system, built on a profound knowledge of the underground world. However, the ending of this story was as absurd as the very idea of living in a cave. They say the knight was betrayed by a servant who signaled the enemy with a flashlight while Erasma was heading for the castle's most vulnerable spot, the outhouse, which was located on a ledge. A single, precise cannon shot ended the great rebel's journey at the most inopportune moment. Predjama Castle is living proof of what people are willing to do for the illusion of complete immunity. It is an architecture of fear, where comfort was sacrificed for security. Inside, you can still smell that distinctive scent of dampness and old stone. It is a place where you can physically feel the mountain pressing down on you with its full mass. Parasite Castle remains one of the most extraordinary monuments to engineering, one that chose life in darkness and mold over death in the open air. It's a triumph of will over common sense, one that must be seen at least once in a lifetime to understand. Sometimes your home can truly become your fortress, but in doing so, it ceases to be a home. And we move on to a castle built not for protection, but to fulfill dreams for which they paid too high a price. We come to the most recognizable structure on the planet, one you've likely seen in the opening credits of famous cartoons. But behind the fairy tale spires and snow-white walls of Neuschwanstein Castle lies a history of utter loneliness, financial ruin, and sheer madness. While previous castles were built for protection or out of strange tastes, this one arose from the profound spiritual crisis of one man, King Ludwig II of Bavaria. This structure is often called the king's diagnosis. And there's a great deal of truth to that. Ludwig didn't want to be a ruler. He hated politics, the hustle and bustle of Munich, and military parades. He was in love with knightly legends and the music of Richard Wagner. His madness was that he decided to spend the entire national fortune on building a private dream world where he could escape reality. But Schwanstein is neither a living house nor a fortress. It is a gigantic, incredibly expensive theatrical set, frozen in stone amid the Alps. The king demanded the impossible. He wanted the castle to recreate the atmosphere of Wagner's operas. His private chambers include an artificial cave, a grotto with a waterfall and colorful electric lighting, something beyond the realm of fantasy in the late 19th century. Thousands of tons of cement and marble were used in the construction, and 14 craftsmen spent 4 years carving the wood in the king's bedroom alone. While the people of Bavaria wondered where their taxes were going, Ludwig sank ever deeper into his fantasies. The madness of the project was underscored by the fact that the castle, resembling a medieval citadel, was packed with the most modern technology of the time. It had central heating, automatic toilet flushes, and even a telephone line. But all this splendor was built for a single spectator, the king himself. He became increasingly nocturnal, sleeping during the day and wandering the halls at night, imagining himself a fairy tale character. When the king's debts exceeded 14 million marks, the government decided it was time to act. A group of doctors, without even examining Ludwig personally, declared him mentally ill and unfit to govern. This was the only way to stop the endless spending on his architectural hallucinations. The king was effectively deprived of his dream, imprisoned on another estate. The tragic end came just a few days after his death. Ludwig's body was found in a lake under extremely mysterious circumstances that historians discuss to this day. The most ironic part of this story is that the king only lived in his perfect castle for 172 days. He spent 17 years building it, pouring his heart and soul into it, along with the fortune of an entire kingdom, yet never fully enjoyed it. Today, Neuschwanstein brings in colossal profits for Germany, attracting 1,300,000 visitors a year. But within these walls, the presence of a man who was too strange for his time can still be felt. It is a monument to loneliness and the desire to escape into a world that doesn't exist. It looks like a dream, but in reality, it became a gilded cage that ultimately led its creator to a tragic end. This is architectural madness of the highest order, where beauty becomes more important than life, and fantasy replaces reality. But if you thought living in a stage set was strange, wait until we go underground in the next section. There, madness takes on a whole new dimension. Now we head to the famous Loire Valley in France. It would seem that this place should be associated only with elegance, wine, and royal luxury. But hidden among hundreds of beautiful estates is Château de Brezé, a structure that could be called an iceberg castle. Its madness isn't immediately apparent, but as soon as you approach the edge of its moat, your breath catches. This is architecture of total paranoia, where the above-ground part is just the tip of a colossal hidden world. De Brezé's main feature is the deepest dry moat in Europe. At 18 meters deep, it's roughly the height of a 6-story building. Imagine a gigantic chasm, hand-hewn from a single stone. But the strangest thing begins within these sheer walls. The castle's owners, obsessed with security for centuries, decided that a stone palace above wasn't enough. Replica of life underground, transforming the rocky foundation into a veritable city for mole people. The total length of the tunnels beneath the castle exceeds 4 kilometers. These are not simply damp cellars for storing wine. They are fully functional duplicates of homes, where hundreds of people could remain hidden for years, hiding from external threats. Enormous stables were carved here, where dozens of horses were kept in complete darkness. Bakeries capable of providing bread for over 500 people operated here. Just imagine the scale of this. Beneath your feet lies a space where life teemed, artisans worked, and people terrified of the outside world were born and spent their days. The madness of this undertaking is underscored by the fact that a silk processing system was even created in the castle's underground section. The owners did not want to depend on outside supplies and attempted to establish a full production cycle right within the rock. Life in such conditions was like voluntary confinement. A constant temperature of around 12 degrees Celsius, perpetual humidity, and the flickering light of torches. This is the reality of the inhabitants of this underground ark. Château de Brézé also houses one of the largest wine presses in the world, also hidden deep underground. The castle's owners distrusted the surrounding environment so much that they even turned the winemaking process into a secret operation. This architectural decision seems completely irrational. Why build a magnificent Renaissance palace above if you're going to spend most of your time in tunnels, as if escaping the coming apocalypse? Today, entering these endless corridors creates a strange feeling of claustrophobia and awe. It's a monument to human fear, which has driven people to gnaw at stone for 500 years. Château de Brézé is literally a castle with a double bottom. It demonstrates the lengths people will go in their quest to create the perfect refuge, turning their home into a complex labyrinth, from which it was sometimes impossible to find a way out without a guide. This is architecture that looks not to the sky, but to the very depths of the earth, concealing the secrets of its inhabitants from sunlight. If Neuschwanstein Castle was a dream of a fairy tale, then the Brez is a dream come true of complete invisibility. But are you ready to descend into the darkness, where time stood still for hundreds of years? We leave these cold tunnels and move on to a structure that makes hearts beat faster not from its depths, but from the atmosphere of utter decay and decay. We leave France and move to the wooded foothills of Belgium, where a structure long hid among dense thickets that was rightfully considered the king of all abandoned places in Europe. Chateau Miranda is not just a building, it is a gigantic monument to slow decay and how nature mercilessly takes its toll when man gives up. While the previous entries on our list struck us as outlandish or over the top, Miranda strikes right at the heart with its eerie, almost tangible atmosphere of total oblivion. This majestic neo-Gothic structure was erected in the 19th century. The family of Count Liedkerk-Beaufort was forced to flee their ancestral home during the French Revolution and decided to build something even more impressive. A renowned English architect worked on the project, transforming the castle into a true masterpiece. 500 windows, endless pointed towers, and a colossal central bell tower that dominated the entire forest. It seemed destined to stand forever, but fate decreed otherwise. Miranda's mad history began after World War II. The owners handed the castle over to the Belgian National Railway Company, and the luxurious estate was converted into a children's camp. It was then that it received its second name, Château de Noisy. For several decades, the screams and laughter of thousands of children never ceased here. But in 1991, everything came to an abrupt end. Maintaining the enormous building became too expensive, and it was simply closed. And this is where true human madness manifests itself. Over the next 25 years, the castle's owners behaved more than strangely. They categorically refused to sell the building to the state or private investors, who begged for permission to restore it. There were dozens of offers to turn the castle into a hotel, a museum, or a cultural center, but the family rejected absolutely everything. They preferred to watch their ancestral legacy crumble to dust. It was a twisted form of hubris. If the castle doesn't fully belong to us, let no one else have it. As a result, Miranda became the embodiment of the darkest post-apocalypse imaginable. With each passing year, the castle increasingly resembled a rotting giant. The roof began to cave in, the floors rotted, and trees crawled through the empty window sockets into the rooms. Chaos reigned within. Remnants of furniture, broken chandeliers, and old toys from children's camp, covered in a layer of mold and dust. It was a sight that chilled the blood. The castle looked like a set for a film about the end of the world, where humanity vanished in an instant. Many brave souls climbed inside, despite the risk of collapse, to capture this slow disappearance. They said that time flows differently inside the castle. A heavy, sticky silence reigns, broken only by the creaking of rotting beams and the sound of drips falling from the ceiling. Miranda literally dissolved into the fog and moisture of the Belgian forests. Unfortunately, this story does not have a happy ending. In 2016, when the castle became completely dangerous to the public, demolition began. Today, almost nothing remains of its former grandeur, but the memory of this rotting giant lives on in the hearts of all lovers of mysterious architecture. This was a castle that was killed neither by time nor by war, but simple human indifference and stubbornness. It has become a symbol of how quickly beauty can turn to dust if deprived of human warmth. We are leaving this ghostly forest and heading to where madness has decided to retreat deep underground, taking the form of an upside-down world. We are leaving the misty forests of Belgium and heading to sunny Portugal, to the city of Sintra. But don't expect ordinary beach views here. We are heading to Quinta da Galera, a place called the most mystical and strange estate in the world. If you thought the Parasite Castle in the rock was the ultimate fantasy, then prepare yourself for an architectural shock that will literally turn your perception of reality inside out. The owner of this estate was Antonio Augusto Carvalho Montero, a man incredibly rich and equally eccentric. They called him Montero Millionaire. He invested his entire colossal fortune in creating a vast puzzle garden filled with symbols of alchemy, Freemasonry, and ancient orders. But the main attraction, the one that draws millions of people, is hidden from view. It's the initiation well, which would more accurately be called an inverted tower. The madness of this structure lies in the fact that it's a full-fledged tower with filigree carvings, arches, and staircases, but it's built not upwards, but deep within the earth. That's architecture. Imagine, on the contrary, a spiral gallery that descends into damp, cold darkness to a depth of 27 meters. That's the height of about a 9-story building, hidden beneath your feet. Standing at the edge and peering down can be downright dizzying. The walls of the well are covered in moss, and the staircase consists of 9 flights. It's said to be a direct reference to the 9 circles of hell from Dante's Divine Comedy. The owner intended anyone descending here to undertake a symbolic journey through darkness to light, undergoing purification rituals. This is no ordinary well. It has never held water. It is a portal to another dimension, crafted from stone and human ambition. Trypophobes and those afraid of confined spaces will have a hard time here. With every step downward, the air becomes colder and damper, and the strip of sky above shrinks. The stonework is so precisely crafted that it seems as if a giant screw had carved this funnel into the earth. At the bottom of the well is a huge Templar cross inscribed with the Montero coat of arms inscribed within an 8-pointed star. But the real fun begins below. When you reach the bottom, the journey doesn't end. From the darkness of the well, labyrinthine underground tunnels branch off in different directions. They are cut into the rock and lead to other parts of the garden, to hidden waterfalls, grottos, and yet another, wilder well. This entire underground labyrinth was designed to completely disorient you. You enter the earth in one place, and then wander around in another, completely unaware of how you got there. Quinta da Regalera is a monument to the lengths a person can go when they decide to materialize their dreams and secret knowledge. It's architectural madness in its purest form, because there's not a shred of practical utility here. This colossal amount of work, this entire abyss carved out of solid stone, served only one purpose: to satisfy the owner's craving for mysticism and theatrical effects. Looking up at this structure from the bottom is a visual shock in its own right. You see layers of stone and spiraling staircases ascending toward a distant circle of light, and in that moment, it truly seems as if the world has turned upside down. This place makes you feel tiny and insignificant in the face of someone's grandiose obsession. Montero didn't just create a garden. He created an architectural hallucination that continues to haunt people more than 100 years after his passing. This is the perfect transition point to our final number. Because if madness descends underground here, then what awaits us is something frozen between sky and water. And it looks like the true end of civilization. Ready to see the final monster of our top list? We're heading to the open sea. We've reached the top of our ranking. And this place looks like it was dreamed up by the makers of films about the distant future or an alien invasion. Imagine the open sea, the gray waves of the Arctic Ocean. And suddenly, right out of the water, a group of gigantic, rusty monsters rises before you. These are the Monzel forts, steel towers on slender stilts, frozen off the coast of Great Britain. These are not just architectural madness. They are true monuments to human paranoia and the technological desperation of World War II. They were built in the 1940s, when the skies over England were literally ablaze with enemy air raids. Engineer Guy Monsell came up with a plan that seemed brilliant at the time, but today looks like a set for a movie about the end of the world. He decided to extend the defensive line directly into the sea, installing enormous concrete foundations topped with metal boxes. Each group consisted of 7 towers, connected by narrow bridges. In the center stood a control tower, surrounded by gun platforms, ready to rain fire on anyone who dared approach the Thames estuary. But the true madness of this project lay not in its appearance, but in what it was like to be inside these iron cans. Imagine being several kilometers from the shore. Beneath your feet, a seething abyss, and all around you, only the endless roar of the wind and the crash of the waves smashing against the metal piles. Soldiers lived in these cramped quarters for years, virtually isolated from the outside world. Inside the towers, a constant, maddening noise filled the air. The sound of diesel generators mingled with the grinding of metal as the storm rocked the entire structure. Fort residents reported that after a few weeks of this life, the boundaries of reality began to blur. Men suffered from severe seasickness, even though they were technically on land. The confined space, the perpetual humidity, and the knowledge that beneath them there was only a rusty support sloping into the dark waters turned service here into a protracted mental nightmare. When the war ended, these iron walkers were of no use to anyone. They were simply abandoned to die at sea, but their insane story didn't end there. In the 1960s, these abandoned boxes became a battleground for pirate radio stations. Daredevils seized the towers, installed transmitters there, and broadcast to the entire country, hiding from the law in international waters. One of these platforms was even declared an independent state, the Principality of Sealand, with its own flag, currency, and even constitution. People were willing to engage in armed conflict and risk their safety for the sake of these rusty scraps of land in the middle of the ocean. Today, the Monzel forts are dead skeletons of their former glory. Time and salt water mercilessly destroy the metal. The bridges have long since collapsed into the water, the staircases have rotted, and inside, only the wind blows, flipping through the pages of discarded magazines and newspapers 80 years old. Approaching them by boat is mortally dangerous. At any moment, the multi-ton structure could collapse, burying any curious tourist beneath it. It's the perfect ending to our top list. The Monzil forts show us what happens when human fear and military necessity meet the power of the elements. This is soulless architecture, crafted from steel and concrete for struggle, but ultimately becoming a symbol of utter loneliness. Looking at these towers slowly sinking underwater, you realize that sometimes our attempts to defend ourselves seem far more frightening than the threat itself. Now I have a question for you. Where would you risk spending one night if $1 million were at stake? Leave your number in the comments. Let's see how adventurous you are. See you in the next episode. Bye.